My own son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, Vanessa thinks it would be better if you didn't join us for Christmas this year." 30 years of unconditional love, of working 3 jobs to give him everything, of nursing him through childhood illnesses, and this is how he repaid me. What broke my heart wasn't just the rejection. It was the little smirk on Vanessa's face as she stood behind him, arms folded across her designer sweater that I'd paid for last birthday. They had no idea that for the past 5 years, I'd been secretly making their mortgage payments. No idea that the roof over their heads existed because of me. And they certainly had no idea what I was about to do next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my life would turn out this way. My name is Eleanor Wright, and I spent 32 years pouring every ounce of love and energy I had into raising my son, David. When my husband Jack died unexpectedly of a heart attack, David was only 7 years old. I was left alone to raise our child and somehow keep our modest home in Mapleton. Insurance barely covered the funeral expenses. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table that first night alone, bills spread out before me, wondering how I'd make it through the next month, let alone the next decade. But when David padded into the kitchen in his Superman pajamas, eyes still red from crying for his daddy, I knew I'd find a way. I took on extra shifts at the hospital where I worked, as a nurse. On weekends, I cleaned houses in the wealthy part of town. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in their gleaming marble countertops, hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under my eyes, hands red and chapped from cleaning products, and barely recognize myself. But it was worth it. Every time. David brought home a good report card. Every time I could say yes when he needed money for a school trip. Every time I could put a decent meal on the table, I knew my sacrifices mattered. When David graduated high school and got accepted to Westridge University, I was beyond proud. The acceptance letter came with a partial scholarship, but it wouldn't cover everything. That night, after David went to bed, I pulled out my emergency fund lockbox. Inside was $15,000. Every spare penny I'd managed to save over the past decade by taking on extra night shifts and forgoing any luxury for myself. The next morning, I handed David a check for his tuition deposit. The look of surprise on his face was priceless. "Mom, where did you get this money?" he asked, eyes wide. "I've been saving," I said simply. "Your education matters." College changed David. He became more confident, more ambitious. He majored in business and talked constantly about the corporate world, about making connections and climbing ladders. I noticed he called home less frequently, and when he did, our conversations grew shorter. He asked fewer questions about my life and seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned my work at the hospital. It was during his junior year that he met Vanessa Harrington. She came from the kind of family that owned vacation homes in multiple countries and had buildings named after them on campus. The first time David brought her home to Mapleton, I could tell she was forcing herself to be polite. Her eyes swept over our modest living room, the worn sofa, the faded curtains, the simple decorations, and I saw the judgment there. "Your home is quaint," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that masquerades as politeness. Over dinner, she talked about her family's recent trip to the Maldives and the summer home they were building in the Hamptons. I served the pot roast I'd spent all day preparing, using my mother's recipe that David had always loved. Vanessa took 2 small bites before pushing it around her plate. "I usually follow a very strict dietary regimen," she explained, not bothering to hide her distaste. "Grass-fed, organic, you know." That night, after they'd gone up to bed, in separate rooms at my insistence, I overheard them talking. "God, how do you stand living here when you come home?" Vanessa whispered. "It's just temporary," David replied. Once we're married and I'm working at your dad's firm, we'll never have to step foot in a place like this again." His words cut deep. This place was the home where I'd raised him, where I'd kissed his scraped knees and helped him with homework, where I'd held him when he cried after his father's funeral. But I swallowed my hurt. Every mother has to let go eventually, I told myself. After David graduated, he did indeed go to work for Vanessa's father's investment firm in Lakeshire, a high, wealthy suburb about an hour from Mapleton. They got engaged shortly after, and the wedding was a lavish affair at the Harrington estate. I wore a dress I'd saved 3 months to buy, wanting to look presentable in front of the Harringtons and their friends. Still, I felt like an outsider at my own son's wedding. Vanessa's mother, Judith, made it clear I didn't belong. During the rehearsal dinner, she cornered me by the bar. "Eleanor, dear," she said, sipping champagne that probably cost more than my weekly salary. "We're so impressed that you managed to raise David all on your own, working as a—" She paused, as if the word might taste bad in her mouth. "A nurse, it's quite remarkable he turned out so polished." I smiled tightly. Children tend to flourish when they're loved. She laughed as if I'd told a particularly amusing joke. "Love is wonderful, of course, but connections and proper breeding do make such a difference, don't you think?" After the wedding, David and Vanessa bought a house in Lakeshire, a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial with pristine white columns and a manicured lawn. It was far beyond what a young couple starting out should have been able to afford. When I visited for the first time, David proudly gave me a tour. "How can you afford this place?" I asked, genuinely concerned about the financial burden they were taking on. David shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa's parents helped with the down payment, and I'm doing well at the firm." What he didn't say, but what became clear as the tour continued, was that they were living well beyond their means. Designer furniture filled every room. A luxury SUV sat in the garage next to Vanessa's sports car. When I opened the refrigerator to help prepare lunch, I found it stocked with gourmet foods and expensive wines. That night, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. David was stressed about bills. The mortgage was higher than they'd anticipated, and Vanessa had overspent their budget again. They didn't know I was listening from the guest room. "We can't keep living like this," David said, his voice strained. "The credit cards are maxed out." "My father can't find out," Vanessa hissed. "He thinks we're managing perfectly well. If he knew we were struggling, he'd think you're not good enough to provide for me." "Maybe we should consider a smaller place," David suggested. "Are you insane?" Vanessa's voice rose sharply. "What would my friends say? Besides, your mother lives in that depressing little house and she manages fine. Mom lives modestly because she had to raise me alone. And now you've moved up in the world. We are not downgrading our lifestyle." The next morning, I left, earlier than planned, making up an excuse about a shift at the hospital. But I wasn't going to work. Instead, I drove straight to Parkview Bank in Lakeshire. I'd been saving for years for my retirement, living frugally and putting away every extra dollar. The account had grown to just over $175,000, not enough to retire comfortably, but enough to give me security in my later years. "I'd like to set up a new account," I told the banker, "and I want to arrange for automatic payments from this account to a specific mortgage." The banker looked confused. "You want to pay someone else's mortgage?" "My son's," I said firmly, "but he can't know it's coming from me." After some discussion and paperwork, it was arranged. Each month, a significant portion of the mortgage, payment on David and Vanessa's colonial, would be covered by my account. The bank would list it simply as a partial payment assistance program that the couple had supposedly qualified for through the bank. For 5 years, I continued this arrangement, draining my retirement savings to keep them afloat. I worked extra shifts to rebuild some of what I was giving away. I never told David or Vanessa. I told myself it was temporary, that once David moved up at the firm. They'd be able to handle their own expenses, and maybe I could slowly recoup my savings. During those 5 years, I saw my son less and less. Invitations to their home became rare. When I did visit, Vanessa was always busy with some charity committee or social engagement. David seemed perpetually distracted, constantly checking his phone or bringing work home. My grandchildren, twins named Emma and Ethan, knew me mostly through FaceTime calls and the birthday and Christmas gifts I sent. Then came last December. I'd been looking forward to spending Christmas with them for months. I'd saved up for special gifts for the twins, who were now 4 years old. I'd even splurged on a cashmere sweater for Vanessa, hoping to finally bridge the gap between us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The call came 3 days before Christmas. David's voice sounded strained on the phone. "Hey, Mom, about Christmas." "I was just packing up the gifts to bring over," I said cheerfully, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. There was a pause then. "The thing is, we're having some of Vanessa's family over. Her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, some cousins." "That sounds lovely," I said, though my heart was already sinking. "What time should I arrive?" Another pause. "Actually, Mom," Vanessa thinks. "Well, we both think it might be better if you didn't join us this year." The words hung in the air between us. 32 years of sacrifice, of love, of putting his needs before my own, and now I wasn't welcome at Christmas. "I see," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears welling in my eyes. "It's just that the house will be full with Vanessa's family, and you know how her mother can be. It would probably be uncomfortable for you anyway." "Of course," I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wouldn't want to make things uncomfortable. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd counted pennies to buy David's school supplies, where I'd worked on budgets late into the night to make sure he had everything he needed. And I made a decision. If I wasn't family enough to be included at Christmas, perhaps I wasn't family enough to keep paying their mortgage either. The next morning, I drove back to Parkview Bank. The same banker who had helped me set up the payment arrangement years ago was still there. Her face lit up with recognition. "Mrs. Wright, how are you?" "I need to make a change to my arrangement," I said calmly. "I want to stop the payments to my son's mortgage immediately." She looked concerned. "Are you sure? This has been going on for quite some time." "I'm very sure," I replied, "and I'd like to close this account entirely. I'm moving my money to a different bank." As I walked out of Parkview Bank, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first. I had no idea how David and Vanessa would react when they discovered that their mysterious payment assistance program had suddenly disappeared, or what would happen when the full mortgage payment came due in January. But for once, that wasn't my problem to solve. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would transform not only my life, but the lives of everyone in my family. The mortgage payment was just the first domino to fall in a series of events that would reveal truths long buried and force us all to reckon with the real meaning of family. January arrived with its typical chill, but nothing compared to the cold reality about to hit David and Vanessa's picture-perfect life. I was enjoying my morning coffee when my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. After the Christmas rejection, we hadn't spoken at all. I'd sent gifts for the twins through the mail with a simple card signed, "Love, Grandma." No response, not even a perfunctory thank you text. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with our mortgage," David said, skipping any greeting. His voice had that familiar tension, the sound of my son trying to hide his panic. "Oh?" I responded, keeping my voice neutral. What kind of mistake? The payment assistance program we qualified for. It's gone. The bank says it was terminated. He paused, clearly waiting for me to offer help. Our mortgage payment just doubled. We can't afford that right now. It was remarkable how quickly I'd transformed from family outcast to financial lifeline. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the moment. That's concerning, I said mildly. Have you spoken with the bank manager? Of course I have, David snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Sorry. Yes, I spent 2 hours there yesterday. They claim we never actually qualified for any official assistance program. They can't explain where the payments were coming from. How mysterious, I replied. Mom, I was thinking. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you possibly help us out? Just until we figure this out? We can't miss a mortgage payment. It would destroy our credit. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't welcome for Christmas dinner, but my money certainly was. 5 years of secretly supporting them, and now he was directly asking for more. David, I said carefully, I'm a retired nurse. Do you really think I have enough money to cover half of your mortgage payment in Lakeshire? There was a long pause. I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Where's Vanessa's family in all this? The Harringtons have more money than they know what to do with. Another pause. Vanessa doesn't want her parents to know we're struggling. Of course, she didn't. Image was everything to Vanessa and her family. I pictured her now, probably pacing their marble-floored kitchen, designer loungewear perfectly pressed, manicured nails tapping nervously against her phone screen as she waited for David to secure funds from his lowly nurse mother. I'm sorry, David, but I can't help you, I said firmly. I've been on a fixed income since retirement. Perhaps you could consider downsizing? I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. David's voice became muffled, as if he was covering the phone, and then he returned. Mom, please, he said, desperation creeping in. We can't lose this house. The twins are settled in their preschool. All our friends are here. The mention of Emma and Ethan tugged at my heart. They were innocent in all this. But then I remembered how I'd barely seen them over the holidays, how Vanessa had systematically cut me out of their lives. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I said. You're a smart, capable man. I raised you to be resourceful. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, wondering if I'd made the right decision. Part of me wanted to rush in and fix everything, as I'd always done. But a stronger, newly awakened part knew it was time for David to face reality without my safety net. That afternoon, I received a text from Vanessa. It was the first direct communication we'd had in months. Eleanor, David told me about your conversation. I'm disappointed you aren't willing to help your own son during a crisis. Families should stick together. The sheer audacity left me speechless. Families should stick together, except at Christmas, apparently. I didn't respond. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vanessa standing there, looking immaculate as always, in a camel hair coat and leather boots that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her perfectly highlighted hair was swept into a casual updo that I'm sure had taken her stylist an hour to create. Eleanor, she said tightly. May I come in? I stepped aside, gesturing her into my modest living room. She perched on the edge of my sofa as if afraid it might contaminate her designer outfit. I'll get straight to the point, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. We need help with the mortgage just for a few months. David's due for a promotion, and then we'll be fine. I sat in my armchair, studying my daughter-in-law's face. Despite her composed exterior, I could see the strain around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. Vanessa, I'm curious. Why come to me when your family has so much more to offer? She shifted uncomfortably. My parents believe in financial independence. They helped with the down payment, but they expect us to manage the rest. Financial independence, I repeated slowly. That's an interesting concept coming from the Harringtons. Your parents paid for your education, your wedding, half your house, and from what I understand, your father gave David his job. Her cheeks flushed. That's different. Those were gifts, not bailouts. And what exactly would money from me be? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice softening in what I recognized as her negotiation tone. Look, I know things have been strained between us, and I apologize if you felt excluded over the holidays. It was never my intention to hurt you. Notice how she apologized for how I felt, not for what she did. Classic Vanessa. The holidays were just so hectic, she continued. My mother was being impossible about the menu. My sister was going through her divorce drama, and the twins were overtired and cranky. I thought it would be easier for everyone if we kept it simple. Simpler for me to be alone on Christmas while my only grandchildren opened the presents I sent? I asked quietly. Vanessa had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but recovered quickly. We can make it up to you. In fact, why don't you come for dinner this Sunday? The twins have been asking about their grandma. Have they really? I wondered. Or are you just saying that to manipulate me? That's very kind, I said, not committing. About the mortgage situation, have you considered downsizing? There are lovely 3-bedroom homes in Mapleton that would cost half what you're paying now. Vanessa looked horrified. Move to Mapleton? We couldn't possibly. David's commute would be over an hour, and the schools here aren't up to the standards we want for the twins. The schools were good enough for David, I pointed out. He turned out fine. Times have changed, she dismissed. Besides, what would we tell everyone? That we couldn't afford Lakeshire anymore. It would devastate David's position at the firm. And there it was, the truth. This wasn't about practicality or the twins' education. It was about keeping up appearances, about maintaining the facade of success they'd built. I'm afraid I can't help you, I said firmly. As I told David, I'm on a fixed income. I simply don't have that kind of money available. Vanessa's pleasant mask slipped. You're being deliberately difficult. David told me you have savings. My modest retirement fund is exactly that, for my retirement. I worked hard for every penny of it. And David is your son, she countered, her voice rising slightly. Your only child. Surely securing his future is more important than whatever you're saving for. I studied her for a moment. Have you considered taking on extra? Work yourself. I understand you haven't had a job since before the twins were born. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. Me? Work? We have 4-year-old children, Eleanor. Many mothers work while raising children. I certainly did. That's different, she said dismissively. We have a certain lifestyle to maintain. I'm on 3 charity boards. I run the Parents Association at Brightwood Preschool. My schedule is completely full. I nodded slowly, understanding perfectly. Vanessa's work was maintaining their social position, planning galas, attending luncheons, ensuring the twins had playdates with the right families. It was a full-time job, but not one that generated income. Then I suppose you and David will need to make some difficult decisions, I said. That's part of being an adult. Vanessa's expression hardened. She stood up, smoothing her coat. I thought you cared about this family. I do, I replied calmly. More than you know. After she left, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and vindication. For years, I'd allowed myself to be relegated to the periphery of my son's life. I'd accepted the canceled visits, the polite disinterest, the way Vanessa controlled access to my grandchildren, all while silently supporting them financially, enabling the very lifestyle that kept me at arm's length. No more. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Judith Harrington, Vanessa's mother. "Eleanor?" she said, her cultured voice immediately recognizable. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, genuinely curious about why she would be calling me. We'd barely exchanged more than polite small talk at David and Vanessa's wedding and a few family events since. "I understand David and Vanessa are experiencing some financial difficulties," she said, carefully choosing her words. So they'd finally swallowed their pride and approached the Harringtons. "Interesting." "Yes, I believe they are," I confirmed neutrally. "Vanessa seems to think you might have been helping them with their mortgage in some way." She was rather vague about the details. I took a deep breath. Here was my opportunity to explain everything, how I'd silently supported them for years while they excluded me from their lives. But something held me back. What purpose would it serve now? "I'm not sure what Vanessa told you," I said carefully, "but I'm a retired nurse on a fixed income. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to help with a Lakeshire mortgage." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Judith recalibrating her approach. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I merely thought there might have been some confusion. Vanessa mentioned something about a payment assistance program that mysteriously vanished." "How strange," I replied, offering nothing more. Another pause. "Eleanor, I hope you don't think I'm overstepping, but I've always admired how you raised David on your own. It couldn't have been easy." Was Judith Harrington actually paying me a compliment? This was new territory. "Thank you," I said. "I did my best. William and I have decided to help them through this rough patch," she continued. "We're arranging for a monthly stipend to cover the difference in their mortgage payment. That's very generous of you." "We can't have them losing the house," she said with a small laugh. "What would people think?" Heaven forbid the Harringtons be associated with something as unseemly as a foreclosure. "While I have you," Judith continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "I was hoping we could discuss Vanessa and David's marriage, mother to mother." This was unexpected. "What about their marriage?" "I'm concerned," she admitted. "Vanessa has always been somewhat materialistic. William and I indulged her perhaps more than we should have, and now I fear their lifestyle has become unsustainable." I wasn't sure how to respond. Was Judith Harrington actually acknowledging her daughter's flaws to me? "They do seem very focused on appearances," I said carefully. "Precisely," Judith agreed. "And I worry that without this financial crisis as a wake-up call, they'll simply continue down this path. William and I won't be around forever to bail them out." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "But I thought perhaps you and I could meet for lunch. Compare notes, so to speak. We both want what's best for them, don't we?" I agreed to meet her the following day at a small cafe halfway between Mapleton and Lakeshire. As I hung up, I wondered what Judith's real agenda might be. The Harringtons weren't known for their straightforward dealings. That night I received a text from David. "Mom, I don't know what you said to Vanessa, but she was upset all evening. We're really struggling here. I thought you'd be more understanding." I didn't respond. Let him wonder for a change. The cafe, where I met Judith, was elegant but understated. The kind of place where wealthy women meet to discuss charitable donations or exchange discreet gossip. Judith was already seated when I arrived, looking impeccable in a silk blouse and tasteful jewelry. "Eleanor, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I've taken the liberty of ordering tea." I settled into my seat, studying Vanessa's mother. She was probably in her late 60s, but looked a decade younger, thanks to whatever exclusive skincare regimen and subtle cosmetic procedures wealthy women of her generation favored. "I appreciate you reaching out," I said, "though I'm still not entirely clear on what you hope to accomplish." Judith smiled, faintly. Direct. "I like that about you, Eleanor. You don't waste time with social niceties. Life is too short, I replied, especially at our age. Indeed. She poured tea for both of us. Let me be equally direct then. I believe Vanessa and David are heading for financial ruin if something doesn't change. I agree. And I also believe, she continued carefully, that you know more about their financial situation than you let on during our call. I took a sip of my tea, considering how much to reveal. What makes you say that? Call it intuition. Or perhaps it's the fact that Vanessa mentioned a mysterious payment program that coincidentally began shortly after they purchased the house and ended right after Christmas, a Christmas you weren't invited to attend. Judith Harrington was shrewder than I'd given her credit for. You seem to have it all figured out, I said. She waved a manicured hand dismissively. Not everything, but enough to know that you've been helping them silently for some time. And if I have? Then I admire your generosity, she said, and I understand why you might have decided to stop. This conversation wasn't going at all as I'd expected. I'd anticipated condescension or manipulation from Judith, not this apparent solidarity. Why did you really ask me here today? I pressed. Judith sighed, setting down her teacup. Because I'm worried about my daughter. Not just financially, but fundamentally. William and I gave Vanessa everything she ever wanted. We never said no. We thought we were showing love, but I fear we created a monster instead. I couldn't hide my surprise at her candor. Don't look so shocked, Eleanor, she said with a small, sad smile. Mothers know their children's flaws, even when we try to ignore them. Vanessa has spent her entire life believing that appearance equals worth, that having the right address, the right clothes, the right friends is what matters most. And now? And now I watch her pushing away the people who truly care about her, like you, while chasing a lifestyle that's making her increasingly unhappy. Judith looked genuinely troubled. Do you know she's on anxiety medication? Has been since college? The pressure she puts on herself to maintain this perfect facade is literally making her sick. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Vanessa that I hadn't expected. I didn't know. Of course not. She'd never admit vulnerability. Judith leaned forward. Eleanor, I don't want to bail them out, not completely. I think they need this reality check, but I also don't want them to lose everything. What are you proposing? A compromise. William and I will help with part of their mortgage, enough to keep them afloat but not enough to maintain their excessive lifestyle. They'll need to make cuts, significant ones. And where do I fit into this plan? I was hoping you might help guide them, Judith said. You raised David to be responsible once. Perhaps you can remind him of those values. He listens to you, whether he admits it or not. I almost laughed. David hasn't truly listened to me in years. You'd be surprised, Judith countered. He speaks of you with great respect when Vanessa isn't around. I've heard him tell William several times how you worked multiple jobs to put him through school, how you never complained even when things were difficult. This revelation caught me off guard. I'd assumed David had completely bought into Vanessa's dismissive view of me and my life. There's something else you should know, Judith continued, her voice dropping slightly. William is stepping down as CEO next year. There's a succession plan in place, and David is being considered for a significant promotion. Not to replace William directly, he's not ready for that, but for a senior vice president position. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased for my son despite everything. It is, Judith agreed, but it's not guaranteed. There are concerns about his judgment, particularly his financial management. This mortgage situation, if it became widely known, could damage his prospects. And there it was, the real reason for Judith's intervention. Not just concern for Vanessa's well-being, but protection of the Harrington legacy. So this is about preserving the family reputation, I said. Judith didn't deny it. Partially, yes, but it's also about helping two people who've lost their way find a healthier path forward, for themselves and for those twins. Emma and Ethan. My heart squeezed at the thought of my grandchildren growing up in a household obsessed with status and appearances, just as their mother had. What exactly are you asking me to do? I inquired. Come back into their lives, Judith said simply. Be the grounding influence that David needs right now. Help him see that there's more to life than the superficial trappings Vanessa is so fixated on. After how they've treated me? After being explicitly uninvited from Christmas with my own grandchildren? I shook my head. Why would I subject myself to more of that? Because you love your son, Judith replied. And because those children deserve to know their grandmother, their real grandmother, not the sanitized version Vanessa allows them to see on occasional supervised visits. She had a point. Emma and Ethan were innocent in all this. They deserved to know me, to understand where they came from. But could I really put myself back in a position to be hurt again? I'll think about it, I said finally. Judith nodded, apparently satisfied with this non-commitment. That's all I ask. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small envelope, sliding it across the table to me. One more thing. David's birthday is next month. Vanessa is planning a dinner at their home. This is your invitation. I took the envelope, noting the heavy cream-colored paper, typical Harrington extravagance even in the midst of a financial crisis. Will you come? Judith asked. As I said, I'll think about it. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Judith surprised me by taking my hand in both of hers. Eleanor, I know we've never been close. I've made judgments about you that were unfair, and based on superficial things. I'm trying to do better. Her eyes, so like Vanessa's, held what appeared to be genuine remorse. Perhaps both our children could learn something from that. I drove home in a state of confusion. The conversation with Judith had upended my expectations and left me questioning my next steps. Part of me wanted to maintain the distance I'd established, to protect myself from further hurt and disappointment. But another part recognized the opportunity being presented, a chance to reconnect with David and to establish a real relationship with my grandchildren. And below these considerations lay a deeper question that had been nagging at me since I'd stopped the mortgage payments. What did I really want? For years, my life had revolved around David, his needs, his success, his happiness. Even my decision to secretly support their mortgage had been, at its core, about helping him. But now, with that obligation lifted, what did I want for myself? The answer came to me slowly as I pulled into my driveway. I wanted to matter, not just as a financial safety net or an occasional visitor, but as a full member of my family. I wanted my experiences, my values, my love to be acknowledged and respected. And perhaps most importantly, I wanted Emma and Ethan to know me, the real me, not the caricature Vanessa had created. With this clarity came a decision. I would attend David's birthday dinner, but I would do so on my own terms, with my own agenda. This wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting the hurt I'd experienced. It was about reclaiming my place in my family's life, not from a position of subservience or desperation, but from one of strength. The Harringtons and my son were about to discover that Eleanor Wright was done playing by their rules. It was time for some new ones. The invitation to David's birthday dinner sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I would pick it up, run my fingers over the embossed lettering, then set it down again, unresolved. The cream-colored envelope seemed to mock me with its elegance, a symbol of everything the Harringtons valued: appearances, social standing, the veneer of perfection. Yet it also represented an opportunity I wasn't sure I was ready to embrace. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I called the number on the invitation, not David or Vanessa's, but a separate line that I assumed belonged to whatever event planner Vanessa had hired for the occasion. Wright residence. This is Camilla. Speaking, answered a polished voice I didn't recognize. Hello, this is Eleanor Wright, David's mother. I'm calling about the birthday dinner invitation. Of course, Mrs. Wright. We're so pleased you'll be joining us. May I confirm your attendance for the 15th at 7 o'clock? Yes, I said firmly. I'll be there. Wonderful. And will you be bringing a guest? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't considered bringing anyone. My social circle in Mapleton was small, mostly former colleagues from the hospital and a few neighbors. None seemed appropriate for what would undoubtedly be a formal Harrington affair. Then I thought of Robert Caldwell, my neighbor from 3 doors down. He was a retired literature professor, widowed like me, with a dry sense of humor and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We'd shared coffee on several occasions, discussed books, and once attended a community theater production together. It wasn't exactly dating, but there was a comfortable companionship between us. Yes, I heard myself say, I'll be bringing Robert Caldwell. After hanging up, I immediately questioned my decision. What was I thinking? Robert and I were barely more than friendly neighbors. Bringing him to this dinner would suggest a relationship that didn't exist. And yet, the thought of walking into the Harrington Lion's Den alone was daunting. Robert's steady presence would be comforting. I walked down the street to his tidy bungalow and knocked on the door. Robert answered in reading glasses and a cardigan, a book still in his hand. Eleanor, he said with a warm smile. What a pleasant surprise. I may have done something impulsive, I admitted, explaining about the invitation and how I'd included him without asking first. Robert listened thoughtfully, then laughed. So you need a shield against the formidable Harringtons? I'd be honored to serve as your protector. It might be uncomfortable, I warned. There's some family tension. I spent 40 years in academia, he reminded me. I'm well-versed in navigating social minefields. Besides, any excuse to escort a lovely woman to dinner is welcome. His easy acceptance calmed my nerves. Perhaps this evening wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. I found myself unexpectedly focused on what to wear, something I hadn't concerned myself with in years. My wardrobe, practical and modest, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for a Harrington event. After much deliberation, I visited a boutique in Mapleton's small downtown area. I need something elegant but not flashy, I told the saleswoman, for a formal family dinner. She studied me thoughtfully, then brought several options. I settled on a deep blue dress with 3/4 sleeves and a subtle shimmer to the fabric. It was more expensive than anything I'd bought myself in decades, but as I looked in the mirror, I saw someone dignified, someone worthy of respect. The woman looking back at me wasn't just David's mother or the ex-housekeeping staff's nurse. She was Eleanor Wright, a woman with her own presence. On the evening of the dinner, Robert arrived at my door looking distinguished in a charcoal suit. He presented me with a small corsage of white roses. You look beautiful, he said simply, and the warmth in his eyes told me he meant it. We drove to Lakeshire in his well-maintained sedan, classical music playing softly on the radio. As we approached David and Vanessa's neighborhood, the houses grew progressively larger, the lawns more manicured. Robert let out a low whistle. Impressive real estate, he commented. Your son has done well for himself. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied, then immediately regretted the cryptic response. Robert deserved better than to be dragged into family drama without context. I'm sorry, that was unnecessarily mysterious. The truth is, David and Vanessa have been struggling financially. They've been living beyond their means for years. Ah, Robert nodded. The classic case of champagne taste on a beer budget. Something like that, though they wouldn't be caught dead with beer. It would be some obscure imported mineral water at minimum. Robert chuckled as we pulled up to the house. Several luxury cars already lined the circular driveway. A young man in a black vest approached as we parked, offering valet service. Robert handed over his keys with a wink to me. "Shall we?" He offered his arm. With a deep breath, I took it. We walked up the stone pathway to the front door, which was opened before we could knock by a uniformed server. "Good evening," he said formally. "Names, please?" "Eleanor Wright and Robert Caldwell," I replied. His eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Mrs. Wright, of course. Please come in. The family is gathering in the main salon." Main salon? When had David's living room been upgraded to a salon? I suppressed an eye roll as we were led through the foyer. The house was immaculate, flowers arranged in strategic locations, soft music playing in the background. It all felt staged, like a show home rather than a place where people actually lived. We entered the living room, salon, to find about 15 people already present, clustered in small conversational groups. I immediately spotted Judith and William Harrington speaking with a couple I didn't recognize. Vanessa was across the room, radiant in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, laughing with her sister. David stood near the fireplace, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand, looking uncomfortable despite being the guest of honor. His eyes met mine across the room, and for a moment, he looked genuinely pleased to see me. Then his gaze shifted to Robert, and confusion crossed his face. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way over to us. "Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You came." "Happy birthday, David," I replied, suddenly emotional at being close to my son again. Despite everything, I loved him deeply. "This is Robert Caldwell, my neighbor and friend." David shook Robert's hand. "Nice to meet you. I didn't realize Mom was bringing someone." There was a question in his voice, and perhaps a hint of judgment. Did he think it inappropriate for his widowed mother to have a male companion? Or was he simply surprised that I had any social life at all? "Robert kindly agreed to accompany me tonight," I explained. "He's a retired literature professor from Mapleton University." "Fascinating," David said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Well, enjoy yourselves. Dinner will be served at 8. If you'll excuse me, I should greet some other guests." He moved away quickly, already pulling out his phone to check something. Robert squeezed my arm reassuringly. "Shall we find some place to perch?" he suggested, guiding me toward a quiet corner where 2 chairs sat empty. "You can identify all the players for me." From our vantage point, I gave Robert a whispered tour of the Harrington universe, Vanessa's sister Olivia and her husband Marcus, who worked in William's firm, William's brother James, who served on several corporate boards, Judith's best friend, Patricia, who chaired the Lakeshore Symphony Guild. Robert listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or making observations that made me smile despite my nervousness. "And the Grande Dame herself is approaching," I murmured, as Judith Harrington detached herself from her conversation and headed our way. "Eleanor, I'm so pleased you could come," Judith said, her smile warmer than I would have expected given our history. "And you've brought a friend." I introduced Robert, who charmed Judith immediately with his knowledge of the symphony she supported and a comment about the painting hanging above the fireplace, which apparently was by an artist she admired. "You must sit near us at dinner," Judith insisted. "William will enjoy discussing the symphony season with you, Robert." After she moved on, Robert raised an eyebrow at me. "The fearsome mother-in-law seems quite cordial." "Recent developments," I explained. "She and I have reached a sort of understanding." Before I could elaborate, a server approached with a tray of champagne flutes. We each took one, and I used the opportunity to scan the room for my grandchildren. There was no sign of Emma or Ethan. "Looking for someone?" Robert asked. "My grandchildren." I thought they might be here. at least for part of the evening. Perhaps they're with a sitter. It is a rather adult gathering. He was right, of course. Still, I had hoped to see them, even briefly. It had been months since our last real interaction. As if reading my thoughts, Vanessa appeared at my side, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Eleanor, how lovely you could make it," she said, leaning in for an air kiss near my cheek. "And with a friend. How nice for you." The condescension in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Robert, either not noticing or choosing to ignore it, extended his hand warmly. "Robert Caldwell, delighted to meet you, Vanessa. You have a beautiful home." "Thank you," she preened slightly. "We've put a lot of work into it." "I've been admiring your art collection," Robert continued smoothly. "The piece above the fireplace. Is that an original Matthews?" Vanessa blinked, clearly surprised that this unassuming older man from Mapleton could identify the artist. "Yes, it is. William and Judith gave it to us as a housewarming gift." "His use of light is remarkable," Robert observed. "I saw a similar piece at the Westridge Museum last spring. Their modern wing has become quite impressive." "Oh, are you a collector?" Vanessa asked, reassessing him. "More of an appreciator," Robert replied modestly. "My late wife was the real enthusiast. She taught art history." The mention of Robert's deceased wife softened Vanessa's expression slightly. "How wonderful that you share her interest. Eleanor, the twins were asking about you earlier." "Were they?" My heart lifted. "Are they here?" "They're upstairs with their nanny. They've already had dinner, but I thought perhaps you might want to say goodnight to them before they go to bed." "Around 9?" It was a small concession, but I seized it gratefully. "I'd love that." "Wonderful." Vanessa glanced across the room. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on something with the caterer." As she walked away, Robert leaned closer, to me. "She's exactly as you described. Was I too harsh?" "Not at all. That woman could give masterclasses in genteel condescension." I laughed, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. Robert's presence was proving even more valuable than I'd anticipated. Having him beside me, steady and perceptive, made me feel less like an outsider in my son's life. Dinner was announced shortly thereafter, and we were all directed to the dining room where an elegant table had been set for 16. Place cards marked our positions, and true to Judith's word, Robert and I were seated near her and William. David was at one end of the table, with Vanessa at the other. A seating arrangement I found oddly formal for a birthday celebration. The meal was elaborate, 5 courses, each paired with a different wine. The conversation flowed around topics: safe for mixed company, real estate trends in Lakeshire, the upcoming charity gala season, someone's recent trip to Tuscany. I noticed David barely participated, responding when directly addressed but otherwise seeming preoccupied. He checked his phone several times beneath the table, a breach of etiquette that didn't go unnoticed by Vanessa, who shot him irritated glances. During the fish course, William Harrington turned his attention to me. "Eleanor, Judith tells me you were a nurse at Mapleton General for many years." "Yes, 35 years in total. I retired 5 years ago." "Admirable profession." He nodded. "Challenging work?" "It was," I agreed, "but deeply rewarding." "Nursing is so essential," added Patricia, Judith's friend. "Though I imagine the hours were difficult, especially as a single mother." There was a hint of something in her voice, not quite pity, but a certain awareness of class difference. I'd encountered it often in Vanessa's social circle. "They were," I acknowledged, "but it taught David the value of hard work and sacrifice." I glanced toward my son. "Didn't it, David?" David looked up from his plate, momentarily flustered. "Absolutely. Mom worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities." "And now look at you," William said heartily. Senior account manager, on track for vice president. You've done your mother proud. David smiled tightly. Thank you, sir. The conversation shifted to William's upcoming retirement and the changes it would bring to the firm. I watched David's face carefully during this discussion. There was tension there, a tightness around his mouth that suggested anxiety rather than anticipation. When dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation that looked too artistic to eat, Vanessa tapped her glass for attention. Before we bring out the cake, I'd like to propose a toast to David, she announced. To my wonderful husband on his 39th birthday. You're an amazing father, a devoted husband, and the cornerstone of our beautiful life together. Everyone in this room admires your dedication and success. Glasses were raised, congratulations murmured. David nodded his thanks, but there was something forced about his smile. As the servers brought in a cake blazing with candles, I excused myself quietly. It was nearly 9, and I was determined not to miss my promised time with the twins. I slipped away from the dining room and made my way upstairs. I'd only been to the second floor a handful of times, but I remembered the twins' rooms were at the end of the hallway. As I approached, I heard children's voices and the low murmur of an adult, the nanny, presumably. I knocked gently on the half-open door. Inside, Emma and Ethan were sitting on the floor of a playroom adjacent to their bedrooms, dressed in matching pajamas. A young woman sat nearby, supervising as they built something with colorful blocks. "Grandma!" Emma spotted me first, scrambling to her feet and running toward me. Ethan followed close behind. They collided with my legs, wrapping their arms around me in a tangle of small limbs and eager affection. My heart swelled. Whatever complications existed between me and their parents, the connection with these children was pure and unmarred. I knelt down to their level, gathering them into a proper hug. "Look how you've grown," I marveled, taking in their faces. Emma had David's eyes, while Ethan had his determined chin. "I've missed you both so much." "We missed you too," Emma declared. "Mommy said you were busy." The simplified explanation pierced me. "I've been thinking about you every day," I assured her. "What have you been doing? Tell me everything." For the next 15 minutes, I sat on the floor as they showed me their toys, their artwork, their newest skills. Ethan had learned to write his name, while Emma was proud of her ability to count to 50. The nanny, Maria, she introduced herself, sat quietly, allowing us our reunion. "Grandma, will you come to our birthday party?" Ethan asked suddenly. "We're gonna be 5. "When is your party?" I asked, realizing I didn't even know the date of my own grandchildren's birthday celebration. 2 more weeks, Emma said authoritatively. "We're having a bounce house and a magician and a chocolate fountain." "That sounds wonderful," I said, looking to Maria for confirmation. "May 6th, she supplied. At the Lakeshore Country Club. Another lavish event, no doubt. I wondered briefly if David and Vanessa had scaled back any of their spending since the mortgage crisis, but this didn't seem to be the case. "I would love to come to your party," I told the twins. "If your mommy and daddy invite me." "They will," Emma insisted. "I'll tell mommy tomorrow." "It's time for bed now, little ones," Maria said gently. "Say goodnight to your grandmother." More hugs, more declarations of love and promises to see each other soon. As the nanny shepherded them toward their rooms, I felt a mixture of joy and sadness. These brief moments weren't enough. I wanted to be a real presence in their lives, to read them bedtime stories, to bake cookies together, to teach them the simple values that had guided my own life. I made my way back downstairs deep in thought. The dinner party had moved to the living room, where coffee and after-dinner drinks were being served. I spotted Robert chatting amiably with William Harrington. David was nowhere to be seen. Judith approached me, a cup of coffee in hand. "Did you see the twins?" "Yes, thank you. They're wonderful children." "They are," she agreed. though perhaps a bit overindulged. I raised an eyebrow at this unexpected criticism from a grandmother who I'd assumed was part of the overindulgence problem. Vanessa tends to substitute material things for time and attention, Judith continued, lowering her voice. Not unlike how I raised her, I'm afraid. It's a pattern I recognize all too well. They seem happy enough, I offered, not wanting to criticize my son and daughter-in-law openly, despite my own concerns. Children are resilient, Judith said, but they're also perceptive. They know when something isn't right in their home. This cryptic comment hung in the air between us. Before I could ask for clarification, David appeared from the direction of his home office, looking agitated. There you are, Judith said. Everything all right? Fine, he replied tersely. Just had to take a call. On your birthday? Judith raised an eyebrow. Surely work could wait. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood, a sign of stress. It wasn't work. Judith seemed about to press further, but David turned to me. Mom, did you see the kids? Yes, they're adorable. They invited me to their birthday party. A flash of something, guilt, anxiety, crossed his face. Right, the party. I meant to talk to you about that. They're quite excited about it, I said. A bounce house and a magician, I hear. Vanessa has been planning it for months, he said. It's going to be extensive. I gathered as much. I studied my son's face. David, is everything okay? You seem distracted tonight. He forced a smile. It's just been a long week at work. End of quarter reporting, client presentations, the usual. I didn't believe him. After 32 years of motherhood, I could read the signs of my son in distress. But this wasn't the time or place to press the issue. Well, you should enjoy your birthday, I said instead. It's not every day you turn 39. Last year of my 30s, he acknowledged with a weak laugh. Hard to believe. An awkward silence fell between us. There was so much I wanted to say to him, so many questions I wanted to ask. How could he have excluded me from Christmas? Did he know I'd been making their mortgage payments? Was he happy, truly happy, in this life he'd built? But the middle of his birthday party, surrounded by Vanessa's family and friends, was not the moment for such a conversation. Your friend Robert seems nice, David offered, clearly searching for a neutral topic. He is, I agreed. He's been a good neighbor. Just a neighbor? There was a hint of something in his voice, curiosity, perhaps, or concern. A friend, I clarified. We enjoy each other's company. David nodded slowly. That's good. You should have. People in your life. The awkward phrasing made me smile despite myself. Yes, David, people are generally preferable to solitude. He had the grace to look embarrassed. You know what I mean. I do, I assured him. And yes, it's nice to have friends. Speaking of which, I should find Robert. We should probably head home soon. It's a bit of a drive back to Mapleton. You could stay, David suggested suddenly. We have a guest room, both of you, he added, hastily. Separate rooms, of course. The offer surprised me. Thank you, but I think we'll head back tonight. I have plans tomorrow morning. This was a small lie. My Sunday mornings were typically quiet affairs involving coffee and the newspaper, but I wasn't ready to spend the night under Vanessa's roof, even as a gesture of reconciliation. Another time, then, David said, and I was struck by the genuine regret in his voice. Perhaps Judith was right. Perhaps he did value my presence more than I'd realized. I'm glad I came tonight, I told him truthfully. It was good to see you, and the twins. They've missed you, he admitted. We all have. The simple statement caught me off guard. After months of silence, after being excluded from Christmas, after all the hurt and disappointment, here was my son acknowledging, however obliquely, that my absence had been felt. David, I began, not entirely sure what I wanted to say, but feeling that something needed to be spoken between us. Before I could continue, Vanessa appeared at David's side, slipping her arm through his possessively. "There you are, darling. The Morgans are asking about the vineyard you visited in Napa, the one with that amazing Cabernet." She nodded at me curtly. "Eleanor, enjoying yourself?" "Very much," I replied smoothly. "You've put together a lovely evening." "Thank you," she said, though there was little warmth in her response. "David? The Morgans?" "Right," he said, allowing himself to be led away. He glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Apology, perhaps, or something. More complicated. I found Robert engaged in conversation with Olivia, Vanessa's sister. He looked up as I approached, his eyes crinkling warmly. "Eleanor, there you are. I was just hearing about Olivia's work with the Historical Preservation Society. Fascinating," I said, though I was too distracted by my interaction with David to engage fully. "Robert, would you mind terribly if we headed back soon? It's getting late." "Of course not," he said immediately, attuned to the subtle tension in my voice. "Olivia, it was a pleasure to meet you." We made our polite goodbyes, thanking Vanessa for the evening, congratulating David once more on his birthday. As we walked to the door, Judith pulled me aside briefly. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. It meant a lot to David, whether he can express it or not. "It was enlightening," I replied. She squeezed my arm gently. "We'll talk soon." The drive back to Mapleton was quiet, Robert respecting my need for silence as I processed the evening. The questions that had been swirling in my mind before dinner remained largely unanswered, and new ones had joined them. What was really happening in my son's life? Why had he seemed so distracted and anxious at his own birthday celebration? And what had Judith meant about the twins knowing something wasn't right in their home? As we pulled up to my house, Robert turned to me. "Would you like to talk about it?" I considered the offer. Robert had been an unexpected source of support tonight, his steady presence a comfort in the sometimes hostile territory of the Harrington social circle. But the thoughts and feelings churning inside me were still too raw, too unformed. "Not tonight," I said, "but thank you for coming with me, for being so understanding." "It was my pleasure," he replied, "and when you're ready to talk, I'm a very good listener." He walked me to my door, waiting as I unlocked it and turned on the light inside. There was a moment when we stood facing each other, and I wondered if he might lean in for a goodnight kiss. Instead, he took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Good night, Eleanor. Call me tomorrow if you need anything." As I watched him walk back to his car, I realized that something had shifted, not just between Robert and me, but within myself. The evening hadn't gone as I'd expected, but it had revealed possibilities I hadn't considered. The possibility of a real friendship with Robert. The possibility that David did miss me. The possibility that Judith Harrington might become an unlikely ally in my quest to reclaim my place in my family's life. I entered my house with a strange sense of anticipation. The battle wasn't over, far from it. But for the first time in months, I felt like I might be winning. The morning after David's birthday dinner, I woke early, my mind still processing the events of the previous evening. The cool morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains as I prepared my coffee, a Sunday ritual I'd maintained for decades. As I settled into my favorite armchair with the steaming mug, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Judith Harrington. "Coffee at Westridge Garden Cafe, 11 a.m. Much to discuss." I hesitated. My relationship with Judith was still new and fragile, more of a strategic alliance than a friendship. Yet I couldn't deny my curiosity about what she wanted to discuss. After our conversation last night, I sensed she knew more about David and Vanessa's situation than she had initially revealed. I'll be there, I replied. The Westridge Garden Cafe was exactly the sort of place Judith would frequent. Elegant without being showy, discreet, with well-spaced tables ensuring private conversations remained private. I arrived a few minutes early and was surprised to find Judith already seated in a secluded corner, a pot of tea before her. "Eleanor," she greeted me, rising slightly as I approached. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Your text intrigued me," I admitted, taking the seat across from her, though I'm not sure what could be so urgent after seeing each other just last night. Judith poured tea into a delicate china cup and pushed it toward me. Things have developed since then. I received a rather concerning call from Vanessa this morning. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "It seems," Judith said carefully, "that David did not come home last night. This was not what I had expected." "What do you mean he didn't come home? He was there when Robert and I left." Apparently, shortly after the last guests departed, he told Vanessa he needed to clear his head. He took his car and left. No explanation, no destination. He hasn't returned, and he's not answering his phone. I felt a twist of anxiety in my chest. That doesn't sound like David. "No," Judith agreed. "It doesn't." "What does Vanessa think happened?" Judith's mouth tightened. "Vanessa is convinced he's having an affair. She's been suspicious for months. Late nights at the office, secretive phone calls, unexplained expenses." The pieces started to fit together. David's distraction at his birthday dinner, the tension between them, his mysterious phone call, in the office. Still, I found it hard to believe. "David wouldn't do that," I said firmly. "Whatever his faults, he takes his commitments seriously." "I tend to agree," Judith said, surprising me. "Which makes me wonder what's really going on. Something has been off for months, according to Vanessa. She says David has been withdrawing money from their accounts in small amounts. Nothing huge, but consistent. When she asks about it, he becomes defensive. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd stopped providing, about the financial strain. They must be under trying to maintain their lavish lifestyle. Could it be gambling?" Judith continued, "or some sort of addiction?" "No," I said with certainty. "Whatever was happening with David, I knew he wasn't gambling or using drugs. David has always been extremely risk-averse. Even as a child, he was cautious, never the one to take dares or make impulsive decisions." Judith nodded, considering. "This. What about investments gone wrong? Some men get in over their heads trying to make quick returns." "That seems more plausible," I admitted. "But why wouldn't he just tell Vanessa?" "Pride, perhaps, or fear of disappointing William. David knows his promotion depends partly on demonstrating sound financial judgment." We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Something was nagging at me, a memory from years ago that seemed relevant but remained just out of reach. "I'm worried about him, Eleanor," Judith said quietly, and I was struck by the genuine concern in her voice. "This behavior isn't like David at all." "I agree. Have you spoken with William about this?" "Not yet. He's golfing with clients this morning. And truthfully, I wanted to speak with you first. You know David in ways William and I don't." This acknowledgement that my understanding of my son was valuable, perhaps even essential, meant more than Judith could know. "What does Vanessa want to do?" I asked. "Currently, she's vacillating between fury and panic. She wanted to call the police, but I convinced her to wait. A missing persons report would raise questions we might not want answered yet." Questions. That could jeopardize David's standing at the firm, I realized. Always the Harrington reputation to consider. Did David take anything with him? Clothes? Personal items? Not that Vanessa noticed, just his wallet and phone. And the twins? Do they know anything is wrong? They were asleep when he left. Vanessa told them their father had an early meeting this morning. Judith's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't like lying to the children, but in this case, it seemed kindest. I pulled out my phone and tried calling David's number. It went straight to voicemail. David, it's Mom. Please call me as soon as you get this. I'm worried about you. I ended the call and looked at Judith. Has Vanessa checked his email? His computer? She tried, but everything is password protected. What about credit card? Transactions? Has there been any activity since last night? Judith raised an eyebrow, impressed by the question. I don't know. That's a good idea. I think we should go to the house, I decided. I want to look at his office myself. Do you think that's wise? Vanessa is in quite a state. All the more reason for us to be there, I insisted. Besides, the twins might reveal something. To me that they wouldn't tell Vanessa. Children often confide in their grandparents. Judith considered this, then nodded. Very well. I drove here so we can go together if you'd like. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to David and Vanessa's house. The festive atmosphere of the previous night had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Vanessa opened the door before we could ring the bell, her eyes red-rimmed, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled. Any word? Judith asked immediately. Vanessa shook her head, then noticed me standing beside her mother. Her expression hardened slightly. Eleanor, what are you doing here? I'm here to help find my son, I replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated by her tone. May we come in? She stepped aside reluctantly. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, no sign of the twins or their nanny. Where are Emma and Ethan? I asked. Maria took them to the park, Vanessa said, running a hand through her uncombed hair. I didn't want them to see me like this. Has David made any contact at all? Judith pressed. A text? An email? Anything? Nothing. His phone is still going straight to voicemail. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. I checked our credit cards online. There's been no activity since yesterday afternoon. What about his office? I asked. Have you been in there today? I tried, but his computer is locked, and he keeps some files in a safe that I don't have the combination for. She gave a bitter laugh. Apparently, my husband has secrets. We don't know that, I said firmly. Let me see his office. Sometimes a mother notices things others might miss. Vanessa looked ready to object, but Judith placed a hand on her arm. Let Eleanor try, dear. We're all on the same side here. With obvious reluctance, Vanessa led me to David's home office, a wood-paneled room with a large desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. It was meticulously organized, which didn't surprise me. David had always been orderly, even as a child. I'll leave you to it, Vanessa said curtly, closing the door behind her. I took a moment to absorb the space my son occupied when he worked from home. Family photos adorned the desk. David with the twins at the beach, a professional portrait of Vanessa looking flawless, a candid shot of all four of them at what appeared to be a holiday gathering. Notably absent was any photo of me or David's childhood. I moved methodically around the room, not entirely sure what I was looking for, but trusting my instincts. The computer was indeed locked, the screen dark. The safe was built into the wall, behind a small painting. A rather obvious hiding spot, I thought. I examined the bookshelves, noting the titles: business books, financial manuals, a few biographies of successful executives. On the bottom shelf, nearly hidden behind a large reference volume, I spotted something unexpected: a battered copy of The Once and Future King by T.H. White. It had been David's favorite book as a teenager, one I'd given him for his 16th birthday. Inside the front cover, I'd written, "To David, may you always find wisdom in these pages. Love, Mom." I pulled the book from the shelf, surprised he'd kept it all these years. As I opened it, a folded piece of paper fell out. I picked it up and carefully unfolded it. It was a handwritten letter, the paper worn from multiple readings. Dear David, I've tried reaching you through official channels without success. Please understand that I'm not trying to disrupt your life. I only want to know my brother. We share the same blood, the same father. Don't we deserve a chance to know each other? I realize this is complicated for you. I'm not asking for money or recognition, just a conversation. I'll be at Riverside. Park every Saturday morning at 9 by the old boathouse for the next month. If you decide to meet me, I'll be there. Regardless of what you choose, I wish you and your family well. Your brother, Jason. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling slightly. A brother? David didn't have a brother. Jack had been an only child, and I'd never had another child after David. Unless... The memory that had been tugging at me earlier finally surfaced. Years ago, when David was around 12, Jack's ex-girlfriend had contacted me out of the blue. She'd claimed Jack had fathered her son shortly before our relationship began. I'd dismissed it as a ploy for money and never mentioned it to David. After all, Jack was gone, and what good would it do to tarnish his memory in our son's eyes? But what if it had been true? What if Jack had another son, older than David? A son who had somehow found out about his half-brother and was now reaching out. I sank into David's desk chair, the implications flooding my mind. If David had discovered he had a half-brother, it would explain so much. The secretive behavior, the unexplained absences, the small withdrawals of money that might have been used to help this newfound relative. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Judith entered, closing the door behind her. "Any luck?" she asked. Wordlessly, I handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her eyebrows rising. "A brother? But how is that possible?" I explained the encounter with Jack's ex-girlfriend all those years ago, my dismissal of her claims, my decision to protect David from what I'd assumed was a false accusation. "And now this Jason person has found David," Judith said, connecting the dots. But why would this cause David to disappear in the middle of the night? "I don't know," I admitted. "But it can't be a coincidence. Look at the date on the letter. It's from 3 months ago. That aligns with when Vanessa says David's behavior started to change. Does the letter mention where this Jason lives? How David might contact him?" "Just that he'd be at Riverside Park on Saturday mornings." I glanced at my watch. Today is Sunday. If David has been meeting with this person regularly, Vanessa would have noticed his absence on Saturday mornings, Judith reasoned. Unless he had a cover story, he could have said he was golfing, or at the gym, or meeting clients. Judith nodded slowly. "We need to find out more about this Jason person, and we need to do it discreetly." "The internet," I suggested. "If we knew Jason's last name, we could search for him online." "What was Jack's ex-girlfriend's name? The one who contacted you?" I closed my eyes, trying to remember. Lisa Marshall, I think. So we're looking for a Jason Marshall, possibly in his mid-40s, with some connection to this area. We returned to the living room, where Vanessa was pacing anxiously, her phone clutched in her hand. "Did you find anything?" she demanded. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. This was sensitive information, and I didn't know how Vanessa might react. "We found something that might help us understand what's been going on with David," I said, carefully. "But we need to do some research first." "What did you find?" Vanessa's voice rose. "If you know something about my husband, you need to tell me." Judith stepped in smoothly. "Vanessa, dear, let's sit down. Eleanor and I have a theory, but it's just that, a theory. We don't want to jump to conclusions." Reluctantly, Vanessa perched on the edge of the sofa. Judith sat beside her, while I remained standing, the letter still in my hand. "There's a possibility," I began, "that David has recently discovered he has a half-brother." Vanessa's eyes widened. "What?" That's impossible. Not impossible, I corrected gently. Years ago, before David was born, his father may have had a child with another woman. Someone named Jason has reached out to David, claiming to be his brother. And you believe this? This random person? Vanessa scoffed. It's obviously a scam. Someone trying to get money from us. I handed her the letter. Read it yourself. Does this sound like someone trying to extract money? Vanessa scanned. The letter, her expression shifting from disbelief to confusion. David never mentioned any of this to me. Maybe he was trying to process it himself first, Judith suggested. It would be quite a shock to discover you have a sibling you never knew about. But why would this make him disappear? Vanessa asked, echoing Judith's earlier question. That's what we need to find out, I said. Vanessa, can you check your calendar for the past few months? Has David had any regular Saturday morning commitments? Vanessa frowned, thinking. He's been playing golf with clients most Saturday mornings. At least, that's what he told me. Can you verify that? Call one of the clients, perhaps? Her frown deepened. I suppose I could call Marcus. He and David sometimes golf together. She pulled out her phone and made the call, putting it on speaker. Marcus, it's Vanessa. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. No problem, came a male voice. Great party last night. David seemed to enjoy himself. Thanks. Listen, this might sound odd, but have you and David been golfing on Saturday mornings recently? There was a pause. Golfing? No, not for months. I've been coaching my son's soccer team on Saturdays this spring. Why do you ask? Just confirming some scheduling details, Vanessa replied smoothly. Thanks, Marcus. She ended the call, her face pale. He's been lying to me. For months. Not necessarily lying, I said, trying to diffuse her rising anger. He might have been meeting with Jason, trying to understand their connection better. Without telling me? His wife? Vanessa's voice rose again. What else has he been hiding? Let's not jump to conclusions, Judith cautioned. The important thing now is to find David and make sure he's okay. We need to find this Jason person, I said firmly. He might know where David is, or at least have some insight into his state of mind. How do we do that? Vanessa demanded. We don't even know his last name. I think it might be Marshall, I said. The woman who claimed to be pregnant with Jack's child was named Lisa Marshall. That's not much to go on, Vanessa pointed out. It's a start, Judith said. We can search online, see if we can find any connection to the area. Vanessa stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm calling the police. My husband is missing, possibly with some con artist who's convinced him they're related. This is exactly the kind of situation where we need professional help. Wait, I urged. Before you do that, let me try something. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang several times before a woman's voice answered. Hello? Lisa? Lisa Marshall? Yes. Who's this? Took a deep breath. This is Eleanor Wright, Jack Wright's widow. We spoke many years ago about your son. There was a long silence. I remember, Lisa finally said, her voice guarded. Why are you calling now after all this time? It's about my son, David. He's missing, and I think it might have something to do with your son, Jason. They've apparently been in contact recently. Another pause. Jason mentioned he'd found his half-brother. I told him it might not be a good idea to reach out, but he was determined. He's always wanted to know his father's family. Lisa, please. I need to find David. Do you know where Jason is? Could David be with him? Jason lives in Riverdale now. He's a high school English teacher. She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I'll text you his address and phone number. But Eleanor, please be gentle with this situation. Jason is a good person. He never wanted to cause any trouble. Thank you, I said sincerely. I just want to find my son." After we hung up, I waited anxiously for the text to arrive. When it did, I showed it to Judith and Vanessa. "Riverdale?" Vanessa said. "That's only about 30 minutes from here." "Should we call first?" Judith asked. "No," Vanessa decided, suddenly taking charge. "I want to see this person face to face. I want to see where my husband has been sneaking off to all these months." We took Judith's car. The three of us united in our concern for David despite the tension still simmering between us. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, repeatedly checking her phone for any message from David. I sat in the back, my mind racing with possibilities and regrets. Had I made a terrible mistake all those years ago, dismissing Lisa's claim so easily? Had I robbed David of the chance to know his half-brother sooner, in a less disruptive way? And what did this mean for Jack's memory? The man I had loved, the father David had idolized, had he really abandoned his first child without a second thought? The address in Riverdale led us to a modest townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, small but well-maintained, with potted plants, flanking the front door and a bicycle chained to the railing. Not at all what I might have expected from someone running a scam. Vanessa was out of the car before Judith had fully stopped, striding up to the door and ringing the bell with determined urgency. Judith and I followed, exchanging concerned glances. The door opened to reveal a man in his mid-40s with sandy hair and hazel eyes that widened in surprise at the sight of three women on his doorstep. "Can I help you?" he asked, his gaze moving between us with growing confusion. "Are you Jason?" "Marshall?" Vanessa demanded. "Yes," he confirmed cautiously. "And you are?" "I'm Vanessa Wright, David Wright's wife." She tried to look past him into the house. "Is my husband here?" Jason's confusion deepened. "David? No, he's not here." "Why would he be?" "Because he disappeared last night," I said, stepping forward. "I'm Eleanor Wright, David's mother. We found your letter in his office." Recognition dawned in Jason's eyes. "Mrs. Wright, I've heard about you." He looked at the three of us standing tensely on his doorstep and sighed. "You'd better come in." He led us into a small living room filled with books and comfortable, if well-worn, furniture. Academic degrees hung on the wall alongside what appeared to be student artwork. Nothing about the space suggested deception or manipulation. "Please, sit down," Jason offered. "Can I get anyone water or coffee?" We all declined, too focused on finding answers to bother with pleasantries. "When did you last see David?" Vanessa asked immediately. Jason sat in an armchair across from us. "Yesterday morning. We meet most Saturday mornings at Riverside Park, or sometimes here if the weather is bad." "And he seemed normal? Not upset or agitated?" I pressed. Jason considered this. "He was thoughtful. We had a significant conversation, one we've been building toward for weeks, but he didn't seem distressed when he left." "What was this significant conversation about?" Vanessa demanded. Jason looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure it's my place to say. That should come from David." "My husband is missing." Vanessa's voice rose sharply. "He didn't come home last night. He's not answering his phone. And I find out he's been secretly meeting with a man claiming to be his brother for months. I think I'm entitled to some answers." Jason winced at her tone, but nodded. "You're right, and I'm truly sorry to hear David is missing. That's concerning." He took a deep breath. The conversation was about our father, Jack Wright, about the kind of man he was. I felt a chill run through me. What about Jack? Jason's eyes met mine, and I saw no malice there, only a deep, old sadness. David had questions about him. Growing up, he'd been told his father was a hero, hardworking, principled, devoted to his family. But that didn't match what my mother had told me. I knew Jack as the man who got my mother pregnant, then abandoned her when she refused to get an abortion. Vanessa glanced at me, shock evident in her expression. Is this true? I closed my eyes briefly, memories washing over me. I don't know. Jack never mentioned another child. But he was. Complicated. Not always the man David thought he was. David has been struggling with this, Jason continued gently. Reconciling the father he thought he knew with the father I knew. Yesterday, I shared some old letters with him, letters Jack wrote to my mother during her pregnancy before he cut off contact. They were not kind. And you think this revelation might have caused David to disappear? Judith asked, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the house. Jason shrugged helplessly. I don't know. He was quiet when he left, but that's not unusual. David tends to process things internally before expressing his feelings. Did he mention any plans? I asked. Anywhere he might go to think? No, nothing specific, but... Jason hesitated, then decided to continue. He did ask a lot of questions about how I've lived my life, my choices, my career. He seemed particularly interested in my decision to become a teacher instead of pursuing a more lucrative path. David's always been focused on financial success, I murmured, on achieving more than I could provide for him. He mentioned that, Jason said with a nod. He talked about the pressure he feels to perform at work, to maintain a certain lifestyle, to live up to expectations. Both his own and others. He glanced briefly at Vanessa as he said this. Vanessa's defensive posture softened slightly. He's never said anything to me about feeling pressured. Would you have listened if he had? The question slipped out. Before I could stop it, harsher than I intended. Vanessa flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Perhaps not, Judith interjected smoothly. But we need to consider all possibilities. Jason, did David ever mention specific places that held meaning for him? Places he might go to reflect or to escape? Jason thought for a moment. He talked about a cabin once, somewhere his family used to go when he was young. He said it was one of the few places he felt truly peaceful. I straightened in my seat, memory clicking into place. The lake cabin. Jack's parents owned a small cabin on Lake Mills. We used to spend weekends there during the summer when David was small. After Jack died, I couldn't afford the upkeep, so I sold it. Do you know who bought it? Judith asked. An older couple, the Hendersons. But that was years ago. It could have changed hands several times since then. It's worth checking, Vanessa said decisively, already pulling out her phone. I'll see if I can find the current owner through property records. As she focused on her phone, I turned back to Jason. Have you tried calling David today? No, he admitted. Our arrangement has always been to meet on Saturdays. We text occasionally during the week, but not often. Would you mind trying now? I asked. He might answer you, even if he's ignoring our calls. Jason nodded and pulled out his phone. He dialed, put it on speaker, and we all listened as it rang. To our collective surprise, after 4 rings, David answered. Jason, he said, his voice tired but steady. I was going to call you today. David, Jason replied, relief evident in his tone. Where are you? Your family is here with me. Your mother, your wife, and your mother-in-law. They're worried sick about you. There was a long pause. You're all together? At your place? David sounded incredulous. Yes, Jason confirmed. David, what's going on? Why did you disappear last night? Another pause. I needed some time to think, to figure things out. I didn't mean to worry anyone. Vanessa grabbed the phone from Jason. David, this is completely unacceptable behavior. We've been frantic. The twins keep asking where you are. You can't just walk out without explanation. I'm sorry, David said, his voice flat. I should have left a note. A note? Vanessa's voice rose in disbelief. That's all you have to say? Where are you? I'm at the lake cabin, he confirmed. My suspicion. I needed space. We're coming to get you, Vanessa declared. No, David said firmly. I'm not ready to come home yet. I need more time. Time for what? Vanessa demanded. To decide what I want my life to look like, David replied, a new resolve in his voice. Vanessa, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. The pressure at work, the constant struggle to maintain our lifestyle, the distance that's grown between us. It's all become too much. The raw honesty was unlike anything I'd heard from my son in years. Vanessa seemed stunned into silence. Will you at least tell us you're safe? I interjected, taking the phone from Vanessa's, now loose grip. We've been so worried, David. I'm safe, Mom, he assured me. And I'm thinking clearly for the first time in a long while. Meeting Jason, learning about Dad's true character. It's made me reconsider everything. What do you mean? I asked. I've spent my entire adult life trying to be successful in the ways Dad never was. Financially secure, respected in business, providing a luxurious life for my family. But at what cost? I barely see my children. My marriage has become a partnership in appearances rather than a loving relationship. I'm trapped in a cycle of earning and spending that never brings real satisfaction. David, Vanessa found her voice again. If you were feeling this way, why didn't you talk to me about it? Would you have understood? He asked, echoing my earlier question to her. Or would you have seen it as weakness, as failure to provide the life you expected? Vanessa had no immediate answer. I need time, David repeated. Time to reconsider my priorities, to figure out what truly matters to me. I'm thinking about leaving the firm. Leaving? Vanessa and Judith spoke simultaneously, equally horrified. Yes, maybe teaching, like Jason, or non-profit work, something that matters beyond the bottom line. But what about our life? Vanessa asked, her voice small. Our home, the twins' education? That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, David said. What parts of our current life are actually making us happy? What would we truly miss if we simplified? The house? The country club membership? The luxury cars? Or would we gain more than we'd lose? Time together, genuine connections, purpose beyond consumption? I listened to my son with growing admiration. This was a side of David I hadn't seen since he was young. Thoughtful, principled, questioning. The status quo. How long do you need? I asked gently. A few days, he replied. Maybe a week. I'll call the twins every night, I promise. But please, give me this time. Vanessa looked ready to object, but Judith placed a restraining hand on her arm. We'll respect your need for space, David, Judith said. But please check in daily so we know you're safe. I will, he promised. Thank you for understanding. After we hung up, the four of us sat in stunned silence for a moment. Vanessa's eyes were bright with unshed tears, though whether from relief, anger, or confusion, I couldn't tell. Well, Judith finally said, it seems we've found him. Not exactly in the circumstances we expected, but at least he's safe. He's having some kind of midlife crisis, Vanessa muttered. Talking about leaving the firm, simplifying our lives. It's absurd. Is it? Jason asked quietly. From what David has shared with me, he's been deeply unhappy for years. He's just never allowed himself to acknowledge it, let alone express it. And you've encouraged this, I suppose, Vanessa said accusingly. Filled his head with ideas about giving up everything we've worked for. Jason shook his head. I haven't encouraged anything. I've just listened. Something David says has been in short supply in his life. The barb landed, and Vanessa flinched slightly. You don't know anything about our marriage. You're right, Jason acknowledged. I don't. But I know my brother is in pain, and he's finally confronting it instead of burying it under work and material possessions. I watched this exchange with a growing awareness that Jason might understand my son better after a few months of Saturday meetings than Vanessa did after years of marriage, or than I did, for that matter. When had I last truly listened to David? Without judgment or expectation? When had I last asked him if he was happy, rather than if he was successful? What happens now? I asked, looking at each person in the room in turn. We wait, Judith said pragmatically. We give David the time he's asked for, and perhaps we use that time to reflect on our own roles in his current state of mind. Vanessa stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit around while my husband has an existential crisis in some lakeside cabin. I'm going to talk to him in person. Vanessa, Judith cautioned, he specifically asked for space. I don't care. He doesn't get to unilaterally decide to put our life on hold while he finds himself. We have children, responsibilities, commitments. And those things will still be there in a week, I pointed out. But if you force a confrontation now, you might push him further away. Vanessa looked at me sharply. Don't pretend you understand my marriage, Eleanor. You've been on the outside looking in for years. The words stung, but I refused to be baited. I understand my son, and I know that pushing him when he's asked for space will only strengthen his resolve. Vanessa grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with emotion. I'm going home to my children. They at least need one parent, who isn't abandoning their responsibilities. She turned to Jason, her expression cold. As for you, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay away from my husband until he comes to his senses. Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the house, leaving the three of us in uncomfortable silence. Well, Jason said finally, she's fiery. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. David always did prefer strong personalities. I should go after her, Judith sighed. She shouldn't be driving in this state. She stood and gathered her purse. Eleanor, will you be all right getting back to Mapleton? I can drive her, Jason offered, if that's okay with Mrs. Wright. I nodded, surprisingly comfortable with the idea of spending more time with this man who was, in a strange way, family. That would be fine, and please call me Eleanor. After Judith left to catch up with Vanessa, Jason and I sat together in his living room, each processing the morning's events. I'm sorry about all this, Jason said finally. I never intended to cause disruption in David's life. I just wanted to know my brother. You have nothing to apologize for, I assured him. If anyone should apologize, it's me. I should have taken your mother's claims seriously all those years ago. You and David could have known each other as children. Jason drove me back to Mapleton that afternoon, the journey filled with conversation about David's childhood, Jason's life as a teacher, and our shared connection to Jack. There was an ease between us that surprised me, a natural rapport that made me regret all the years we could have known each other. By the time we reached my house, I had extended an invitation for him to join me for dinner the following weekend, which he graciously accepted. The week that followed was tense with waiting. David called the twins each evening as promised, but kept his conversations with Vanessa brief and practical. He texted me occasionally with simple updates. Still at the cabin, doing a lot of thinking. I'm okay. I resisted the urge to press for more details or to drive to Lake Mills myself. My son had asked for space, and I was determined to respect that request, no matter how my maternal instinct screamed to intervene. Vanessa, according to Judith's daily phone calls, was oscillating between rage and despair. She'd called in sick to her charity committee meetings, leaving the planning for the annual fundraiser in disarray. The twins, sensitive to the household's strained atmosphere, had become clingy and irritable. Maria, their nanny, was working overtime to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Robert stopped by midweek with a casserole and a sympathetic ear. I found myself sharing the whole complex situation with him over dinner, grateful for his thoughtful questions and lack of judgment. "It sounds like David is finally confronting some hard truths," he observed, refilling my wine glass. "That takes courage." "I just hope he doesn't throw away everything he's worked for," I said. "A week of solitude at a lake cabin is one thing, but completely reinventing his life? That's a drastic response." Robert considered this. "Is it, though? How many people spend their entire lives in jobs that drain their spirits, relationships that diminish their joy, chasing a version of success that never truly satisfies? Maybe what looks like a crisis from the outside is actually the most sane response to an insane situation." His words stayed with me long after he'd gone home. I found myself reevaluating my own choices over the years. Had I encouraged David to prioritize financial success over personal fulfillment? Had my own struggles as a single mother unintentionally sent the message that money was the ultimate measure of a secure life? On the 7th day of David's retreat, my phone rang just after breakfast. David's name flashed on the screen. "Mom," he said when I answered, his voice stronger than it had been in our brief exchanges that week. "I'm coming back today, but before I go home, I'd like to see you. Can I come by around noon?" "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my eagerness in check. "I'll make lunch." "Nothing fancy," he said quickly. "Just, I need to talk to you first, before I see Vanessa and the kids." The morning crawled by as I straightened up the house, prepared a simple meal of soup and sandwiches, and tried to prepare myself for whatever David might say. When the doorbell finally rang, I had to take a deep breath before answering. David stood on my doorstep looking simultaneously exhausted and energized, the paradoxical state of someone who has been doing intensive emotional work. He'd grown a week's worth of stubble, and his usual polished appearance had given way to jeans and a faded sweater. But his eyes were clear, more present than I'd seen them in years. "Mom," he said simply, and then he was hugging me, a real embrace, like we hadn't shared since before college. I held him tightly, breathing in the scent of him, this grown man who would always be my little boy. Inside, we settled at my kitchen table with bowls of soup and cups of tea. David took a few bites, then set down his spoon and looked at me directly. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Many apologies, actually." "David, that's not necessary." He held up a hand. "Please let me say this. I've spent the past week doing nothing but thinking and writing, trying to untangle the mess I've made of my priorities. And one of the clearest realizations I've had is how shamefully I've treated you." I swallowed hard, unprepared for this direct addressing of the hurt I'd carried for so long. "The Christmas exclusion was inexcusable," he continued. "I knew it was wrong even as I allowed it to happen. I told myself I was caught in the middle, trying to keep peace with Vanessa, but the truth is I was being a coward. I put my wife's social aspirations above my relationship with my mother, and I'm deeply sorry for that." "David, there's more," he pressed on. "I've also realized that I've been ungrateful for everything you sacrificed to give me opportunities. Somehow, I transformed from a kid who appreciated your hard work into an adult who was almost embarrassed by it, as if your practical, hard-working life was something to distance myself from rather than honor. That's not just wrong, it's shameful." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I never wanted you to feel that way. I wanted better for you than I had." "And that's exactly what makes it worse," David said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You never once made me feel I owed you anything. You gave and gave without expectation. Meanwhile, I've been obsessed with what everyone owes me: recognition at work, status in the community, gratitude from my family. I've become exactly the kind of entitled person you raised me not to be." I squeezed his hand. You've been under enormous pressure, David. The mortgage, the lifestyle Vanessa expects. That's the other thing I need to tell you, he interrupted, his expression serious. Mom, I know it was you making our mortgage payments all these years. I figured it out about 3 years ago. I stared at him, stunned. You knew? He nodded, looking ashamed. The bank statement called it a payment assistance program, but when I investigated, I discovered it wasn't any official bank program. It took some digging, but eventually I confirmed the payments were coming from your account. Why didn't you say anything? David looked down at his soup. Honestly, at first I was planning to. I was going to thank you to ask why you were doing it secretly. But then I realized I was relieved. Not just about the financial help, but about the fact that it was secret. Because if it was secret, I wouldn't have to explain it to Vanessa. I wouldn't have to admit to her that we couldn't actually afford our lifestyle without my mother's help. Oh, David. I know, he said miserably. It's contemptible. I let my pride and my fear of Vanessa's reaction overwhelm my integrity. And then, as time went on, it became harder to bring up. How could I admit I'd known for years and said nothing? So I just accepted it. Told myself I'd pay you back someday when I made partner. I sat back in my chair, processing this revelation. All this time I'd thought my support was my secret, my private contribution to my son's life. But he'd known, had been quietly accepting my sacrifice while still allowing me to be pushed to the periphery of his family's life. When you stopped the payments after Christmas, David continued, it felt like a wake-up call, like you were finally saying enough. And you were right to do it. I needed that reality check. Is that why you've been meeting with Jason? Because you couldn't afford the mortgage anymore? David looked surprised. No, that's completely separate. I found Jason, or rather he found me, about 3 months ago. His letter was forwarded to my office from our old address in Mapleton. At first, I thought it was a scam, but something about it felt genuine. I called the number he'd included and we agreed to meet. Just once, I told myself, just to see if there was any family resemblance. And was there? I asked softly. A smile touched David's lips. He has Dad's eyes, and his laugh. It was uncanny. We talked for hours that first day, and then we started meeting regularly. He told me about his childhood, about how Dad had initially denied being his father, but eventually acknowledged the truth to Lisa, though he refused any financial support. How Lisa had raised him alone, working multiple jobs, putting herself through night school. I winced, hearing the parallel to my own life that David was surely drawing. In getting to know Jason, David continued, I've been forced to reckon with who Dad really was. Not the idealized figure I've carried in my memory, but a flawed, sometimes selfish man who abandoned his first child and might have done the same to me if you hadn't been so determined to make our family work. Your father loved you, I said automatically, the defense of Jack's memory so deeply ingrained. I'm sure he did, David acknowledged. But he still made choices that hurt people, including you. And learning that has made me look hard at my own choices. Am I becoming him in the worst ways? Prioritizing appearance over substance, status over genuine connection, using people rather than loving them? I reached across the table and took his hand. You are not your father, David. You've never abandoned your responsibilities. Haven't I? He asked quietly. I've been physically present, but emotionally absent from my marriage for years. I barely know my own children beyond their scheduled activities and bedtime routines. I've pushed you away when you've only ever supported me. If that's not abandonment, what is? I had no answer for that. So that's what the past week has been about, David explained. trying to figure out what kind of man I want to be, what kind of life would actually make me happy rather than just impressive on paper. "And have you figured it out?" I asked. He smiled ruefully. "Not entirely, but I've made some decisions that feel right. First, I'm going to talk to Vanessa about downsizing. We can't afford that house, not really, and I'm tired of the constant financial pressure. We could sell it, buy something reasonable in a good school district, and actually start saving for the twins' college funds instead of living paycheck to paycheck." "How do you think Vanessa will take that suggestion?" David sighed. "Honestly, probably not well initially. But this week has clarified something else for me. I can't keep avoiding difficult conversations out of fear of conflict. That's no basis for a healthy marriage. Vanessa and I need to have some hard, honest talks about our values, our priorities, and what we want to model for our children." "And what about your job?" I asked, remembering his mention of possibly leaving the firm. "That's trickier," he admitted. "I don't think I want to make a drastic career change right now. The stability matters, especially with the twins at a formative age. But I am going to talk to William about shifting my role. Less client acquisition, more focus on the ethical, investment division. It's smaller, less prestigious, but the work actually matters to me, and it would mean more reasonable hours." I nodded, relieved that he wasn't planning to throw away his career entirely. "That sounds sensible. A middle path." "Exactly," David agreed. "And there's one more decision I've made." He took a deep breath. "I want you to be a real part of our lives again. Not just occasional visits, but regular family dinners, weekends with the twins, holidays together. All of it." My heart swelled. "I'd like that very much." "I can't promise Vanessa will make it easy," he warned. "But this isn't negotiable for me anymore. You're my mother, the twins' grandmother. That relationship matters." "Thank you," I said simply, fighting back tears. "Don't thank me," he insisted. "I should have stood up for this years ago. I'm just sorry it took a financial crisis and an existential breakdown for me to find my backbone." We finished our lunch, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, the twins' latest achievements, a book David had been reading at the cabin, a community theater production I was considering auditioning for. It felt natural, this reconnection, as if the barriers between us had simply dissolved during his week of reflection. As David prepared to leave, to drive home and face whatever awaited him there, he paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Jason would like to meet you properly. Not in crisis mode, but just as family. Would that be okay?" "I'd like that," I said sincerely. "In fact, I've already invited him for dinner this weekend. You and the twins should join us." I hesitated, then added diplomatically, "And Vanessa, of course, if she's comfortable with the idea." David smiled. "I'll ask her. But either way, the twins and I will be there." After he left, I sat in my quiet house, allowing the conversation to settle. For so long, I'd carried the hurt of being excluded, of being valued only for my financial contribution. I'd canceled the mortgage payments as an act of self-protection, never imagining it might lead to this profound reconnection with my son. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Judith. "Eleanor," she said without preamble. "David just called Vanessa to say he's on his way home. Did you see him? How is he?" "He's good," I assured her. "Clearer than I've seen him in years, actually. He has some ideas about changes he wants to make." "So I gathered from Vanessa's reaction," Judith said dryly. "She called me in a panic after his call, saying he wants to talk about their priorities and reassess their lifestyle. She's convinced he's having some sort of breakdown." "He's not," I said firmly. "He's finally being honest about what's important to him." Judith was quiet for a moment. "And what about the mortgage situation? Did he mention that?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He knows I was helping them. He's known for a while, apparently. I suspected as much, Judith sighed. William, and I have decided to help them with the mortgage, by the way. Not covering it entirely, but enough to ease the immediate pressure. We're not doing it secretly, though. We've been very clear that it comes with expectations about financial responsibility going forward. That seems wise, I said, impressed by Judith's thoughtfulness. She'd clearly moved beyond simply protecting the Harrington image to genuine concern about her daughter's well-being. Eleanor, Judith said, her voice taking on an uncharacteristic hesitancy. I owe you an apology. As well, for years I've been dismissive of you. I looked at your modest lifestyle, your practical career, and I made judgments that were unfair and, frankly, snobbishly ridiculous. You don't need to. I do, she insisted. While David's been at that cabin reassessing his values, I've been doing some reflection of my own. The truth is, you've been a far better parent than I have. You raised a son who, despite his recent struggles, has a moral compass and the courage to question his choices. I raised a daughter who measures her worth by her address and her social calendar. That's on me, and I'm not proud of it. I was stunned by her candor. It's never too late to model different values, Judith. That's what I'm hoping, she said with a soft laugh. William thinks I've gone soft in my old age. Maybe I have. But I'd rather be soft than rigid, especially now. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, struck by how thoroughly everything had changed in just 1 week. The walls I'd built around my heart after the Christmas rejection were crumbling, making room for something new. Not the restoration of what was, but the creation of something healthier, more honest, more balanced. I decided to call Robert and invite him to the dinner with Jason as well. His steady presence and thoughtful perspective would be valuable, especially if Vanessa decided to attend. As I dialed his number, I realized I was smiling. For the first time in years, I was looking forward rather than backward. 3 days later, my kitchen was filled with the happy chaos of family dinner. Jason and Robert were deep in conversation about a book they'd both read, their immediate rapport a delight to witness. The twins were coloring at the small desk I'd set up in the corner, occasionally running over to show us their creations. David was setting the table, moving comfortably through my small house as if he'd never been away. Vanessa had declined to join us, which didn't surprise me. According to David, their conversations about the future were ongoing and tense. She was resistant to the idea of selling the house, but had reluctantly acknowledged they couldn't afford it without help. David was standing firm on his desire for a simpler lifestyle, one that would allow him more time with his children and less financial stress. It wasn't an easy transition, but it was a necessary one. "Grandma, look!" Emma called, running over with her drawing. "It's all of us in your garden." I examined the colorful scribble, making out stick figures of varying heights. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is this me?" I pointed to a figure with gray hair. "Uh-huh. And that's Daddy, and that's Ethan, and that's me, and that's Grandpa Robert, and that's Uncle Jason." I glanced up at Robert, who was pretending not to have heard the grandpa designation, though the pleased flush on his cheeks gave him away. Jason caught my eye and winked, clearly amused by the child's straightforward adoption of him into her family circle. "Well, it's perfect," I told Emma. "We should hang it on the refrigerator." As I stood to find a magnet, David came up beside me. "Need any help with dinner, Mom?" "You could check the roast," I suggested. "It should be just about done." In the kitchen, away from the others, David spoke quietly. "This is nice, all of us together like this." "It is," I agreed, watching him open the oven with the easy familiarity of someone at home. "I've been thinking about the past week," he continued, "about how it all started with you canceling those mortgage payments." I tensed slightly, uncertain where he was going with this. "I'm glad you did it," he said, meeting my eyes. It was the shock I needed, the first domino that started all of this. He gestured vaguely to encompass the gathering in the next room, the changes in his life. "So, thank you. For having the courage to stop enabling a situation that wasn't working for anyone, least of all, you." I leaned against the counter, taking in my son's words. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop helping in ways that aren't truly helpful. "Exactly," David said, "which is why, after a lot of thought, I've decided to sell the house." "You have? What about Vanessa?" "She's not happy about it," he admitted. "But she's beginning to understand that our current path isn't sustainable. We found a smaller house in a good neighborhood not far from here. It needs some work, but it has potential, and the twins would be able to see you whenever they want." "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "But are you sure Vanessa is on board?" David sighed. "She's getting there. The conversation with her parents helped. They've made it clear they support my decision to prioritize financial stability over appearances. And Judith has been surprisingly firm about it." "Judith has been full of surprises lately," I observed. "She has," David agreed. "But the real catalyst was when I showed Vanessa our actual financial situation, all the debt we've accumulated, the credit cards we've maxed out trying to maintain this facade." She was shocked. She genuinely didn't realize how precarious things were because I've been shielding her from it. That couldn't have been an easy conversation. "It wasn't," he acknowledged, "but it was necessary. We've been living in a fantasy, and fantasies eventually collide with reality. Better to make changes on our terms than wait for everything to collapse." I nodded, thinking about my own decision to cancel the mortgage payments. I hadn't known then what would follow, only that I needed to stop participating in a dynamic that was hurting me. David was making a similar choice now, choosing authenticity over illusion, long-term stability over short-term comfort. "The roast looks perfect," David announced, changing the subject as he carefully removed it from the oven. "Should I carve it?" "Please," I said, gathering the side dishes. As we carried the food to the table, I looked around at the unlikely gathering: my son, my grandchildren, my neighbor who was becoming something more, and the half-brother whose existence I'd once denied. Not the family I'd expected, but a family nonetheless. Real, imperfect, evolving. The mortgage payments I'd canceled had set all of this in motion, not as an act of revenge, as I'd initially framed it in my mind, but as an act of necessary boundary setting. By refusing to continue enabling a situation that diminished me, I'd created space for authentic connection to grow. "Everyone wash up for dinner," I called, as Emma and Ethan raced each other to the bathroom. Jason and Robert moved to help with the serving dishes, and David poured wine for the adults. "This is quite a family you have," Robert murmured beside me, his eyes warm with affection. "Yes," I agreed, watching my son laugh at something Jason said. "It's not what I expected, but somehow it's exactly what I needed." As we gathered around my modest table, the twins squirming with excitement, the adults passing dishes and filling plates, I realized that the true gift of these past months wasn't the restoration of my place in David's life, though that was precious. It was the discovery that by standing up for my own worth, by refusing to be valued only for what I could give financially, I had modeled for my son the very courage he needed to reclaim his authentic self. Sometimes the most loving gift we can offer isn't endless support or silent sacrifice. Sometimes it's the firm boundary that says, "I matter too." And in the wake of that necessary claiming of self-worth, new and healthier connections can flourish. The twins began chattering about their upcoming transfer to a new school, their easy adaptation a reminder of children's natural resilience. David discussed plans for the new house, his excitement genuine despite the downsizing it represented. Jason shared stories from his classroom, and Robert added thoughtful observations that made us all laugh. In this warm circle of conversation and connection, the canceled mortgage payments that had once seemed like a dramatic ending revealed themselves as what they truly were. Not an act of revenge, but the first step toward a new beginning for us. All. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.